Hey Reddit. So this is a story about how I lost my apartment, moved into my car, and accidentally became a housing activist out of pure spite and sleep deprivation. My name's Sophie. I'm 38. I live in Portland, yes, that Portland, and I used to be one of those quirky artist types people tolerated as long as I made their Etsy wedding invites on time and didn't talk too much about rent. Last spring I had surgery. Nothing glamorous, just laparoscopic for ovarian cysts that kept showing up like bad exes. It went fine. The pain meds were good, the nurses were better, and I came home sore but stable to my one-bedroom unit in a 1970s quadplex in the Buckman neighborhood. That place wasn't fancy. No dishwasher, ancient heater that clanked like a haunted xylophone. But it had light. It had a clawfoot tub. It had my stuff. And I could afford the $1,150 rent because I shared the utilities with 2 other tenants and kept my grocery budget basically medieval. Enter Gary. My landlord. 40-something inherited the property from his uncle, runs his business under GMC Equity Holdings, which sounds like a hedge fund but is really just him in his vape pen driving around in a lifted Tacoma with a cracked tail light. Gary didn't like me much. Said I was overly sensitive about paint fumes when he once painted the stairwell with no ventilation. Claimed I had a pattern of challenging communication because I asked why he raised rent by $75 with no upgrades. My favorite? When I requested a new fridge gasket and he sent me a YouTube tutorial titled, "Fix It Yourself, Princess." Anyway, 3 days after I got home from surgery, still stitched, still nauseous, Gary showed up unannounced with his phone camera out and said, "Hey Sophie, just a heads up. We're doing a total gut reno of the unit. Gotta ask you to clear out in 30 days. But no stress, I'll give you a glowing reference." I blinked at him. "You can't evict me without cause." He smiled. "Not an eviction. Just non-renewal. It's legal." It wasn't. Oregon law says if you've been a tenant for over a year, I had 2 years, 7 months, a landlord needs a qualifying reason to terminate without fault, like selling the property, moving in, or serious repairs. Renovations qualify only if they're major and if the landlord offers relocation assistance. Which he didn't. But I was post-op. I was foggy. I didn't fight. I just cried and started looking for storage units. By day 20 I was cow surfing. By day 32 I was in my Honda CR-V, parked behind a 24-hour gym with a blanket duct taped over the window and a cooler of string cheese and electrolyte drinks in the trunk. I called legal aid, voicemail box full. I called the tenant hotline, hold for 43 minutes, then disconnected. I called Gary, he said, and I quote, "You should be grateful I didn't raise the rent instead. Portland's a market, sweetheart. You're not entitled to stay anywhere." I hung up shaking. And then I got mad. The turning point was Linda. Linda lived 2 units over from mine. Sweet woman, retired nurse, loves lemon bars and vinyl gospel records. I saw her while driving by the building one morning and pulled over to say hi. "Guess what?" she said. "Gary's putting the whole building on the market. Says it's fully vacant now. But weren't you living there just a month ago?" Something clicked. I pulled out my phone and checked Zillow. Sure enough. Investment opportunity. Fully vacant 4-unit multifamily with clean tenant history. Pre-approved for green efficiency upgrade credits. Clean. Tenant. History. Funny considering I still had unopened mail going there and a box of my art supplies was probably sitting in the garbage bin behind the house. But here's the kicker. The listing also said the units were eligible for state tax credits under a local clean energy conversion initiative, one that offered incentives only for buildings with no current occupants or active leases. Gary had scrubbed us out. Faked vacancy. Skipped legal protocol. And now? He was cashing in with a smile. I snapped a screenshot. Then 3 more. Then I made a folder on my phone titled, "Gary's Bullshit Do Not Delete." I started driving around with a notebook in the glove box. I began collecting screenshots, timestamps, text logs. I took photos of the empty unit mailboxes that still had names on them. I called the county assessor's office and requested the grant application paperwork under Oregon's public records law. Turns out, anyone can do that. And you bet your ass I did. The night I found the first forged signature on his tenant exit affidavits, I laughed so hard I scared myself. Because this wasn't just shady, it was criminally stupid. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ruin. I wasn't alone. Turns out Gary's equity holdings stretched across 5 other properties in the city. Same pattern, sudden no-cause evictions, rushed, renovations, green tax credit filings, clean, tenant histories. He was gaming the system and bullying low-income tenants out the door while doing it. I found a housing advocate named Tasha through a local nonprofit. She was young, ruthless, and legally terrifying. She helped me file a formal complaint with the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries and draft a public letter to the city's Housing Commission. We started an Instagram account at VacancyScamPDX. First post? The Zillow listing. Caption, "Where did the tenants go, Gary?" It got 14,000 views in 2 days. We were just getting started. Next, I was going to put Gary's face right next to the word fraud in every corner of Portland housing politics. Let me tell you something about being houseless but not helpless. You learn to weaponize Wi-Fi. I was still living in my car, back seat folded down, yoga mat, space heater that only worked when the battery wasn't being sucked dry by my emergency phone charger. I showered at the gym, brushed my teeth in park bathrooms, and did legal research at the library like it was a damn war bunker. Every time someone walked past my screen and saw the words Title 10 Housing Code Violation, Oregon Statutes, I just smiled. I didn't look like a threat. I looked like an artsy 30-something with bad luck and a coffee stain on my hoodie. Gary didn't see me coming. The Instagram account at VacancyScamPDX blew up faster than I expected. By the end of week 2 we had 4,200 followers, 2 tenant stories from other Gary-owned buildings, 3 anonymous tips, and 1 former maintenance guy who sent us an email with the subject line, "You didn't hear this from me, but..." His email included internal emails where Gary referred to tenants as clogs in the resale funnel and instructed his assistant to backdate the renovation orders so it looks legal. I read that 3 times just to let the rage marinate properly. Tasha, my housing advocate/legal superhero, helped me compile a dossier. We printed it on cardstock at the downtown library because I didn't have a home but I still believed in presentation. The front page. GMC Equity Holdings, a pattern of fraud and displacement. The second page. Prepared by Sophie redacted, former tenant and currently pissed. The rest. Timeline of evictions. Copies of falsified tenant exit forms. Screenshots of Zillow listings. A side-by-side of Gary's clean occupancy tax filings versus actual postmarked mail still arriving at the properties. By the time I was done, it looked like a deposition and felt like a prophecy. We emailed it to the Willamette Weekly, a city councilwoman with the Housing Now campaign, 3 local news anchors, the Bureau of Environmental Services because Gary had also claimed green tax credits for water-efficient landscaping on a lot that was literally just dead grass and gravel. Then we printed 20 hard copies, spiral-bound them like a damn grad school thesis and dropped them, anonymously, at City Hall. Each was labeled Urgent, Public Funds Fraud Investigation Required, GMC Equity Holdings. Gary caught on around day 19. I know because he texted me. "I'm hearing things. You need to back off. You're making things worse for yourself." I didn't reply. I just screenshot it and added it to the story queue. Caption, "When the scammer starts to sweat." Followers, 7,800. Comments ranged from "This guy tried the same thing in my building in 2019" to "You are doing God's work, girl." I wasn't doing God's work. I was doing mine. Then the call came. The Willamette Weekly wanted to run a feature. They called it No Vacancy, One Woman's War Against a Portland Real Estate Scam. They interviewed me in the library parking lot. I wore red lipstick and sat on the hood of my Honda like a woman who had nothing left to lose and a full binder of receipts. The reporter said, "You know, this might make some serious noise at City Hall." I said, "Good. I hope it breaks windows." 2 days later, boom. The Oregon Housing and Community Services Department issued a formal audit request into GMC Equity Holdings. The press release cited irregularities in tenant documentation and green tax credit eligibility. Gary went offline. His personal website, GaryKProperties.com, vanished. His name disappeared from Zillow. His assistant couldn't comment due to legal review. I got DMs from 3 different city staffers. One said, "You didn't just shake the tree. You knocked it over." I still slept in my car that night. But I slept damn well. Here's the thing about revenge when you're not rich or powerful or male or backed by a law firm. It has to be precise. It has to be documented. And it has to be louder than the person who tried to silence you. Gary tried to erase me from the tenant record. Now I was on the front page. And next, We were going to find out how many other tax breaks he faked across Portland. Because this story wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone Gary tried to make disappear. Here's the thing about slumlords. They don't expect the people they steamroll to talk to each other. They count on isolation, shame, confusion. That moment of despair when you're sitting on a friend's pull-out couch Googling tenants' rights Oregon at 3:14 a.m. and wondering if you're just imagining the abuse. What they don't count on is someone like me getting bored enough to organize. After the Willamette Weekly story dropped, my DMs exploded. Not with trolls, though. Yes, one guy did call me a woke landlord witch, but mostly with real people who had eerily similar stories. A woman named Camila evicted for renovations from a GMC duplex on Alberta Street just 2 months before me. A couple in their 60s who were kindly asked to leave for a family member's move-in, but that family member never existed. A trans teen who was pressured out of a unit because they might make new buyers uncomfortable. Each one of them? Removed. Scrubbed. Then replaced with empty units, forged exit forms, and grant paperwork. I made a Google form. Labeled it, "Have you been evicted by GMC Equity Holdings?" In 3 weeks, I had 42 verified responses. 42. That was 42 units Gary claimed were vacant. 42 state clean energy tax credits he shouldn't have qualified for. 42 human beings with names, leases, and dates. We mapped every address on a shared doc, color-coded by eviction reason. Spoiler, most were fake, date of removal, and value of the credit Gary claimed afterward. The grand total? $217,000. In fraudulently obtained public funds. My glove box was now an evidence locker. The backseat of my CRV was an operations center. The trunk? Housing Advocacy HQ. I even stored voter registration flyers in there because why not rebuild democracy while you're at it? Tasha and I brought the list to a city hearing. Uninvited. Unscheduled. But we stood in the back row, binder in hand, until one of the commissioners said, "We'll hear from the lady in the scarf who's clearly not leaving." I walked up to the mic. No notes. My name is Sophie. I'm an artist. I was evicted illegally by GMC Equity Holdings under the pretense of renovations. Gary Klein forged tenant records, claimed green energy credits on vacant units that weren't vacant, and stole public money to fund a real estate scam built on displacement. I handed over the list. These are 42 people who didn't vanish. They were erased. I didn't cry, but a woman in the second row did. They called a recess. Tasha turned to me and whispered, "I think you just started something." By the following week, the Portland Mercury picked up the story. The mayor's office issued a statement, and the Oregon Department of Revenue launched a criminal investigation into GMC Equity Holdings. They froze Gary's application pipeline, flagged his properties, issued a citywide notice for tenant re-verification at all properties applying for green development credits. Gary? He lawyered up. Badly. He sent a cease and desist to our Instagram. It was written in Comic Sans. I framed it. We posted it with the caption, "Cease this middle finger." Followers, 23,000. People were tagging his business accounts, his real estate listings, even his contractor partners. A developer dropped him. Then a second. Then his own property management software revoked his vendor login. Turns out, if you're publicly accused of displacing dozens of tenants through fraud and you can't spell defamation correctly in a legal threat, things unravel fast. One night I was sitting in my car watching the news on my phone and there it was. Channel 8. Local anchor, concerned face, bold headline. Landlord under investigation for green tax fraud. Whistleblower speaks out. And then my voice. My words. My face blurred but me. I sipped my lukewarm instant coffee and thought. You really tried to disappear me, Gary. And now I'm louder than you've ever been. But here's the truth. I was still in my car. Still showering at the gym. Still juggling 2 part-time design gigs off a beat-up Chromebook and a library hotspot. Still tired. Because justice is not a free hotel room and a round of applause. It's just a sliver of sunlight and a sharper blade. But the tide was turning. The city council called for a formal tenant protection expansion ordinance. The Housing Commission opened a public inquiry into all past green incentive programs. And me? I was offered a spot on the working group. From illegally evicted to please advise us on policy. I didn't say yes right away. But I thought about it. Because the next part wasn't just revenge. It was reconstruction. And I had blueprints. So I joined the working group. Yes, me. The girl who just months ago was icing her post-op stitches in a Honda behind a 24-hour fitness. Now I was sitting in a city conference room under LED lights with bottled water and folding chairs, staring at a printed agenda that actually used the phrase Tenant First Urban Resilience. I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was wrong, but because it was such a sanitized way to describe what I'd lived. Tenant First Resilience means nothing when your last load of laundry was done in a bathroom sink. But I showed up anyway. Because if Gary could build an empire off forged signatures and fake vacancy, I could build something real out of every single lie he told. The meeting was moderated by a young city staffer who looked one energy drink away from a breakdown. They introduced the room. 2 nonprofit housing orgs. A legal clinic rep. A city developer liaison who wore a suit too tight for his moral flexibility. And me. Sophie, you're here to represent direct lived experience, yes? I smiled. I'm here to represent the 42 people who were erased from Portland housing paperwork. And also myself. But thanks for the invitation. I'd written my notes on the back of my actual eviction notice. Gary's signature was still at the bottom. Symbolism? Unintentional, but deeply satisfying. Meanwhile, on the outside, at Vacancy Scam PDX was still exploding. Now with 38K followers and a series called Before and After Fraud where we posted. Before, listing screenshots showing vacant units. After, selfies submitted by former tenants still holding mailbox keys. We even did a highlight reel called The Gary Files with clips of him from open houses, city meetings, and our personal favorite, a real estate seminar from 2021 where he said, "You have to think of tenants as transitional variables. The asset is the building. Transitional variables, not people." That quote alone got stitched on TikTok by half of Portland Gen Z and turned into a ringtone. But then came the escalation. Because Gary finally realized the city wasn't going to quietly forget. The audit went public. And it wasn't just Portland. He'd filed identical green tax credit paperwork in Salem and Gresham, under the same Shell LLC with the same clean exit affidavits. Carbon-copied fraud. The Oregon Department of Justice issued a subpoena for GMC Equity Holdings. Gary responded the only way he knows how, by doubling down and getting sloppy. He filed a lawsuit against me for defamation, interference, and I kid you not, intentional sabotage of business opportunity. Tasha read the filing and said, "This is the legal equivalent of a drunk text written by someone holding a grudge and a thesaurus." We filed a countersuit. And we made the lawsuit public. Caption, "When a landlord tries to sue you for telling the truth," filed open file folder. Then came the tenant town hall. A real city-sanctioned meeting. Public comment. Media invited. Flyers everywhere. I showed up wearing my "No One is Disposable" hoodie and carried in a duffel bag full of Gary's forged documents. There were over 100 people in attendance. And when I stood up to speak, I didn't talk about policy. I told the story of how I had to store my pain medication in a cooler in my car after surgery. I told the story of how I watched a neighbor in her 70s carry her houseplants out one by one with a limp because she didn't know she had rights. I told the story of how we found our own names erased from records that still held our rent payments but none of our dignity. And then I said, "You want tenant first resilience? Start by making it illegal to fake an empty building. Start by locking up the people who profit from displacement. Start by admitting that what's happening isn't market pressure. It's erasure as a business model." There was silence. Then applause. And a city council member came up to me afterward and said, "We've started drafting the ordinance. It's going to be called the Fair Vacancy Act." I smiled. "I hope you include a line item about forged affidavits." She said, "Oh, we will." In bold. Gary hasn't shown his face publicly in weeks. His lawyer gave one bitter quote to the Mercury. "My client maintains he acted within the bounds of available housing incentives. You can keep telling yourself that, sweetheart. But public records don't lie. And now? Neither do I. Because I know what it's like to be shut out, dismissed, and called a variable. And now I'm a constant. Next. We're taking this statewide." His lawyer called me emotional, so I sent him a spreadsheet and a broadcast interview link. So here's a fun fact about landlord lawsuits. They don't go well when your opponent has documented everything like she's prepping for a congressional hearing. Gary's legal team, 2 gray-haired suits with the charm of a DMV pamphlet, filed a motion claiming I'd caused irreparable harm to a respected entrepreneur's reputation. I emailed their firm's public inbox. Hi there. Attached is a spreadsheet of every fraudulent tax filing, falsified vacancy form, and tenant affidavit contradicting your client's clean exit narrative. Also, here's a link to my Channel 8 interview. The part where I say this isn't defamation, it's documentation starts at 2:43. Warmly, Sophie. They didn't respond. Instead, Gary started showing cracks. First, he pulled down his corporate website. Then he tried to list 2 of his properties off-market, except the city had flagged both addresses pending investigation. Then one of his contractor partners publicly withdrew, saying, "We believe in ethical development and no longer work with GMC Equity." And then his assistant quit. Her goodbye Instagram post? A photo of a cactus with the caption, "Some environments are toxic. Water yourself anyway." I printed it and put it in my binder under departures voluntary. Meanwhile, the tenant coalition we'd formed? Exploding. We held a citywide meetup in the library basement. 80 people came. Some brought donuts. One guy brought a projector and showed a PowerPoint titled, "How to Collect Evidence When Your Landlord Pretends You Don't Exist." The community had turned. No one believed Gary anymore. Not the tenants. Not the city. Not even the people who used to defend him with "he's just playing the market." He wasn't playing. He was cheating. And now we had pages of proof. I was still sleeping rough some nights, crashing on friends' couches others, but it didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like a mission. And then came the domino. The Oregon State Auditor's Office launched a joint fraud investigation with the Department of Revenue and the Department of Housing. Not just into Gary, but into the entire clean energy tax incentive system. Because apparently, he wasn't the only one gaming it. But he was the most obvious. The loudest. The one who posted photos of sustainable units with captions like "efficiency is profit" and tagged #tenant-free living. So now the state was scrubbing every developer's paperwork, and the headlines went from "landlord under fire" to "Mass audit uncovers widespread tax misuse in state housing program." Gary's name was front and center. The Willamette Weekly ran a follow-up feature titled, "From Artist to Architect of Accountability, Sophie's Fight Reshapes Oregon Housing Law." That week, I got a call from a small state rep's office in Salem. "Would you be open to testifying during committee hearings on housing ethics reform?" I said, "Do you have a projector?" "Because I have slides." Gary tried one last Hail Mary. He filed to dissolve GMC Equity Holdings. Classic move. Shut it down. Disappear the paper trail. Unfortunately for him, that just triggered asset freeze requests from the state. He couldn't sell. Couldn't transfer. Couldn't sneeze without someone from Revenue asking to see a receipt. Meanwhile, we passed the Fair Vacancy Act at the city level unanimously. It requires tenant history audits for any building receiving public funds, criminalizes falsified vacancy affidavits, demands relocation assistance with proof of major renovation, creates a public registry of all eviction notices filed in the last 24 months. Gary was the first entry. His name, his company, his full rap sheet, available online, searchable, permanent. You know what the registry is titled? No vacancy. I didn't name it, but the city said it felt fitting. I agreed. Next, we're going to Salem. Because this scam? It's everywhere. Rural towns, college towns, up-and-coming neighborhoods where working-class renters are replaced with condos and buzzwords. I used to think I was alone. Now I know I'm one of thousands. And we're tired of being transitional variables in someone else's asset sheet. Final parts next. I wore the only blazer I owned, thrifted, a little loose in the shoulders, and packed my folder with more care than I'd ever pack for a gallery show. Inside, photocopies of eviction notices, screenshots of Gary's grant filings, a spreadsheet labeled "Proof of Pattern, Updated," and just for flair, a printed Instagram comment that read, "You made me believe again that housing is worth fighting for. The Oregon Capitol is colder than you expect. Not metaphorically, I mean the actual air conditioning. You can freeze trauma in there and stack it like archival footage." The committee hearing was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. I sat on a folding chair behind a woman in pearls and a man with very shiny shoes who'd introduced himself as a multi-property residential partner. No one offered to help me carry my bag. That was fine. I'd been carrying this whole city on my back for the past 6 months. When they called my name, I stepped up. No title. No company. Just Sophie redacted, artist, tenant, and former occupant of a one-bedroom illegally declared vacant. And then I told them the truth. About Gary. About the forged affidavits. About being displaced while recovering from surgery. And living out of a car while a man in a Patagonia vest committed tax fraud in my name. I ended with, housing isn't a spreadsheet. It's not a loophole or a grant game. It's breath. And the moment you let people like Gary redefine it as strategy, you kill something in this state that may never come back. Silence. Then a voice. Thank you, Ms. Redacted. We have no further questions. But I knew they had questions. Because 2 days later, the Oregon Clean Incentive Reform Act passed out of committee. With tenant protections, grant documentation rules, a ban on owner affidavit-only vacancy claims. The kind of laws that'll prevent another Gary. And it started with a girl in a car, with a folder full of rage and backup files in her glove box. I have a place now. It's small. East Side. Sublet. But it's mine. It has a creaky floorboard I named Gary. Every time I step on it I smirk. The first thing I unpacked was my folder. I slid it onto the bottom shelf of my new bookcase, next to a plant that refuses to die. I framed the notice from the city certifying that GMC Equity Holdings was dissolved for cause. There's a gold sticker on it. I bought the frame myself. At full price. People still message the @VacancyScam PDX account. Some are scared. Some are furious. Most just want to know how to start. I tell them, start by writing everything down. Keep the envelopes. Save the texts. Rage quietly until it turns into a plan. And when you speak, don't apologize. Speak like your rent's already due. Because for people like us, it always is. Gary Klein tried to erase me. Now his name lives in a bill, a public registry, and a TikTok audio clip that opens with, transitional variable my ass. I still make art. Mostly out of receipts now. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can make out of pain is evidence. That's the story. No vacancy. Just me and the thousands like me finally making space. Sophie collision.